The traditional interpretation of the Sumerian pantheon as a collection of mythological deities misses the fundamental technical reality preserved in thousands of cuneiform tablets. What we call a religion was, in fact, a complex and highly stratified divine bureaucracy, a celestial corporation with a rigid chain of command that mirrors the administrative hierarchies of modern global superpowers. At the apex of this order stood the supreme triad of Anu, Enlil, and Enki, whose roles were not merely symbolic but functional, encompassing the primary domains of cosmic and terrestrial management. Anu, the Lord of the Sky, operated as the chairman of the board from his administrative hub at Uruk, presiding over the High Council of the Anunnaki and maintaining the overarching legal framework that governed the planetary laboratory. His authority was absolute, representing the constitutional source from which all other executive powers were derived. The technical logs found in the White Temple at Uruk describe Anu's domain as the celestial realm, which in a modern context suggests the management of orbital assets and the high-level coordination of the Anunnaki mission. His presence on Earth was infrequent, as he maintained a position of detached oversight, ensuring that the planetary project remained aligned with the broader objectives of the celestial assembly. This supreme triad established a governance model based on the division of powers long before the formal development of political science in the Western world. The divine bureaucracy was a system of checks and balances designed to prevent the concentration of power in a single individual, ensuring that the management of heaven and earth remained a collaborative, albeit strictly hierarchical, effort. By analyzing the administrative records of Uruk, we begin to see that the gods were not objects of worship, but the primary architects of a systematic governance protocol that continues to influence human institutional structures today. The management of the High Council, known as the Anunnaki Assembly, involved the deliberation of 50 great gods who presided over the fate of the human workforce. This assembly operated with a level of bureaucratic precision that involved recorded votes, legal precedents, and the issuance of formal decrees known as the Namtaru. These decrees were not mere suggestions, but binding legal requirements that governed everything from the construction of major irrigation systems to the declaration of war between city-states. The administrative infrastructure required to support this council involved a vast network of scribes, couriers, and middle managers who ensured that the divine will was communicated across the entire Mesopotamian plain. The relationship between Anu and his sons, Enlil and Enki, was structured as a corporate partnership where each had clearly defined jurisdictions and responsibilities. Anu held the ultimate veto power, but he delegated the day-to-day operations to his executive and technical officers, creating a system of governance that was both stable and efficient. This model of the celestial corporation provided the blueprint for the earthly monarchies that would follow, where the king served as the human proxy for the divine chairman, maintaining the same administrative rigor and hierarchical discipline within the material world. Furthermore, the divine bureaucracy extended its reach into the very fabric of human social organization, establishing the first standardized systems of measurement, taxation, and legal documentation. The ordinances of Anu were implemented through a series of temple-based administrative centers that functioned as the local branches of the celestial corporation. These centers managed the distribution of resources, the collection of tithes, and the maintenance of the public records, ensuring that every aspect of human life was integrated into the divine economic system. The concept of the temple economy was, in reality, a sophisticated logistical network designed to support the Anunnaki mission while providing for the needs of the human labor force. This integration of the religious and the administrative created a state of total social coherence, where the spiritual and the material were governed by a single, unified protocol. As we peel back the layers of mythological allegory, we find a clinical and methodical system of governance that prioritized efficiency, order, and the long-term stability of the planetary experiment. The apex of the celestial corporation was not a throne in the clouds, but a command console at the center of a global management network that shaped the course of human history for millennia. While Anu provided the legal foundation and orbital oversight, the actual executive management of the terrestrial operations fell to his eldest son, Enlil, the Lord of the Wind or the Lord of Command. Operating from his formidable command center, the Ekra Temple at Nippur, Enlil served as the chief operating officer of the mission on Earth. His administrative domain was the atmosphere, the critical space between heaven and earth, which in a technical sense gave him direct control over weather patterns, agricultural cycles, and the physical security of the growing city-states. Enlil's administration was defined by a strict and often unforgiving adherence to the divine decrees, and he was the primary official responsible for enforcing the laws established by the High Council. The administrative tablets recovered from Nippur portray him not as a benevolent father figure, but as a stern and methodical executive, focused entirely on the maintenance of order, the productivity of the human labor force, and the prevention of unauthorized social noise. The technical protocols managed by Enlil's office were vast and detailed, including the surveying and distribution of land, the allocation of vital water rights through the complex canal systems, and the regulation of human population levels. To the Sumerians, the word of Enlil was an unstoppable physical force, representing a set of executive orders that determined the rise and fall of kings and the life or death of entire nations. His sanctuary at Nippur, known as the Mountain House, functioned as the central nervous system of the Sumerian world, where the bond of heaven and earth was maintained through constant surveillance and administrative oversight. Enlil's bureaucracy was composed of hundreds of lesser deities and high-ranking human administrators, each serving as a specialized manager for a specific aspect of the infrastructure. There were managers for the granaries, overseers for the irrigation works, and officials in charge of the metallurgical workshops. This was the birth of the administrative state, a system where authority was decentralized through a network of regional proxies while remaining ultimately and strictly accountable to the central command at Nippur. The executive protocol of Enlil prioritized systemic stability above all else, often leading to conflict with the more evolutionary goals of his brother Enki. Enlil viewed the human workforce as a functional asset that required constant monitoring to prevent the noise of independence from disrupting the divine order. When the human population grew too large or became too loud, Enlil was the official who authorized the corrective measures, ranging from localized famines to the global systemic reset of the Great Deluge. His governance model was based on the principles of containment and control, establishing a hierarchical structure where every individual had a specific assigned role within the grand design. This rigid administrative framework ensured that the resources of the earth were extracted and processed according to the High Council's schedule. Enlil's legacy is the structural model of the modern executive branch and the military-industrial complex, a bureaucracy designed to maintain the stability of the global system through the uncompromising application of law, surveillance, and executive force. In the halls of Nippur, the blueprints for the modern state were first drawn, creating a template for power that values the silence of compliance over the chaos of freedom. In direct contrast to the executive rigidity and containment doctrine of Enlil, the third member of the Supreme Triad, Enki, managed the technical, scientific, and biological infrastructure of the planetary project. Known as the Lord of the Earth and the Master of the Abzu, Enki operated from his primary cult center at Eridu, the oldest and most technologically advanced city in Sumer. His role within the divine bureaucracy was equivalent to that of a chief technical officer or a lead geneticist, responsible for the initial design and subsequent upgrades of the human starseed, the development of advanced metallurgical alloys, and the management of the technical protocols that functioned as the operating system for civilization. Enki's administration was focused on innovation, problem-solving, and the gradual evolution of the human terminal, a mission that frequently placed him in direct opposition to the conservative executive policies of his brother Enlil. The technical records and hymns from Eridu describe Enki as the master architect who drafted the blueprints for the massive irrigation systems and urban layouts that allowed Sumerian civilization to flourish in a previously uninhabitable environment. His bureaucracy was not one of soldiers and tax collectors, but one of engineers, healers, master craftsmen, and scholars, all dedicated to the practical application of the divine, for the advancement of the terrestrial project. Enki's primary facility, the Abzu, was not merely a mythological subterranean ocean, but a sophisticated technical laboratory where the biological and chemical templates of life were maintained, modified, and stored. By controlling the sweet waters, a metaphor for the flow of vital data and biological resources, Enki ensured that the human starseed had the necessary technical intelligence and biological resilience required for its survival and eventual graduation. He was the one who provided the seven sages, the Apkallu, with the instructions for building cities, establishing laws, and mastering the sciences, effectively bypassing the containment filters of the Enlilite faction. Enki's governance model was based on the principles of empowerment, knowledge transfer, and scientific inquiry. While Enlil ruled through command and the threat of force, Enki influenced the system through the distribution of technology and the cultivation of human intellect. He was the protector of the human graduates, often intervening to save the species from the systemic resets ordered by the High Council. His office at Eridu managed the most sensitive data of the mission, including the genetic codes and the astronomical calendars that synchronize the Earth with the celestial stations. This created a dual system of governance within the Anunnaki protocols, a tension between the enforcers of the law and the keepers of the knowledge. Enki's legacy is the scientific and technological impulse of humanity, the drive to understand the source code of reality and to master the material environment through intellect rather than brute force. In the laboratories of Eridu, the spark of human sovereignty was first ignited, creating a counter-narrative to the divine bureaucracy that continues to drive the evolution of our species toward its ultimate potential. The divine bureaucracy established by the Anunnaki at Uruk, Nippur, and Eridu was not a temporary arrangement, but a permanent structural template that has persisted through 4 millennia of recorded human history. When the gods eventually began their strategic withdrawal from direct terrestrial oversight, they did not dissolve the administrative systems they had created. Instead, they handed the keys of governance and the symbols of authority to a carefully selected class of human proxies, the kings and high priests, who claimed divine kingship as their legitimate mandate to rule. This critical transition ensured that the organizational structures and hierarchical protocols of the First Age remained the foundational models for every subsequent human civilization. We see the clear echoes of these Anunnaki protocols in the hierarchical divisions of modern global corporations and governmental bodies, where the roles of the chairman, the chief operating officer, and the chief technical officer reflect the original supreme triad of Anu, Enlil, and Enki. The persistence of this template is visible in our modern world's continued reliance on centralized administrative hubs, standardized legal frameworks, and a specialized management class that operates independently of the general population. The me of the ancient Sumerian world, the sacred protocols for war, kingship, agriculture, and justice, have evolved into the complex algorithms, international treaties, and regulatory frameworks of the digital age. They perform exactly the same function as their ancient precursors: the management and synchronization of the human workforce through the application of technical and administrative authority. Our modern cities are still organized around centralized nodes of power, and our economies are still managed through the collection of data and the distribution of resources by a centralized bureaucracy that mirrors the temple offices of Nippur and Uruk. This is the architecture of an invisible empire, a governance system that has been reskinned and rebranded for the modern era, but whose core operating system remains fundamentally unchanged since its installation 5,000 years ago. By recognizing the Anunnaki protocols within our own contemporary institutions, we can begin to understand the true nature of our political and social reality. We are not living in a world of spontaneous social evolution, but in a carefully managed planetary laboratory governed by administrative structures that were designed for stability, resource extraction, and the containment of human noise. The reclamation of our collective sovereignty requires us to do more than just change our leaders. It requires us to decode the very structure of the divine bureaucracy itself. As we move from being the subjects of a celestial corporation to being the conscious and sovereign administrators of our own global destiny, we must learn to operate the me for our own benefit rather than the benefit of an absent hierarchy. The structure of power is eternal, but our relationship to it is finally reaching a state of collective graduation. The dawn of the Third Age is the moment when the human starseed stops following the ancient blueprints and begins to draft its own architecture for the future. The archaeological recovery of Sumerian temple artifacts often presents a collection of gold, lapis lazuli, and precious gemstones that mainstream historians categorize purely as ceremonial ornamentation or status symbols. However, a technical analysis of the Anunnaki regalia, as described in the cuneiform inventories of the White Temple at Uruk, suggests a far more functional and sophisticated purpose. These items, referred to in the text as the garments of radiance, were described as symbols of access, physical keys required to enter high-security divine precincts and to interact with the technical terminals of the city-states. The golden headdresses adorned with 8-petaled rosette patterns, which were synonymous with the House of Anu, functioned as unique identifiers within the divine bureaucracy. These rosettes were not merely decorative motifs, but represented a standardized geometric encryption that signaled the wearer's rank and level of authorization within the planetary management grid. In the rigid hierarchy of the First Age, the regalia provided the physical interface between the administrator and the technical me that governed civilization. The construction of these ornaments involved metallurgical techniques that achieved a purity of gold and a precision of alloy blending that challenges our understanding of early Bronze Age capabilities. The use of electrum, a natural or intentional alloy of gold and silver, was specifically favored for items associated with the Supreme Triad. Technical logs from the early dynastic periods describe these items as having a life or a resonance that could be felt by those in their presence, suggesting they may have incorporated subtle energy harvesting properties or resonant frequencies. The regalia were treated with the same meticulous care as modern biometric access cards or encrypted hardware tokens. They were stored in high-security chambers within the ziggurats and could only be handled by specialized priestly technicians who had undergone ritual purification, a process that modern observers might recognize as a primitive form of decontamination or electromagnetic grounding. The regalia of the Anunnaki were the hardware keys of a divine operating system, ensuring that the power to command the elements remained strictly controlled within the established administrative hierarchy. Beyond the headdresses and jewelry, the most powerful symbols of Anunnaki authority were the scepter and the measuring rod, items that are consistently depicted in the hands of the high-ranking gods and their human proxies. These were the primary tools of governance, representing the power to dispense justice and the technical ability to survey and shape the physical environment. The measuring rod, often paired with a coiled rope, symbolized the mastery of mathematics, geometry, and land management, the fundamental sciences required to build cities and irrigation networks. In the hands of Enlil or Enki, these were not symbolic icons, but functional instruments used to calibrate the planetary motherboard and to ensure that the material world remained synchronized with the celestial data streams. The scepter, or the staff of command, functioned as a transmitter of executive will, a physical conduit through which the divine decrees were communicated and enforced. The technical literature of Sumer refers to these items as the givers of destiny, suggesting that the possession of the scepter and rod conferred the legal and technical right to manage the human starseed. When a god invested a human king with these regalia, it was a formal transfer of authority, a granting of access to the administrative protocols of the divine bureaucracy. This investiture ceremony was the first instance of the divine right of kings, a concept that established the ruler as a localized node within the broader Anunnaki management network. The regalia functioned as the tangible evidence of this connection, providing the king with the technical legitimacy required to command the labor force and to maintain the social order. Without the scepter and the rod, a ruler possessed no access to the divine, me, and their authority was considered illegitimate. These tools were the physical manifestations of the sovereignty protocol, ensuring that the architecture of human society remained aligned with the blueprints of the architects. The 8-petaled rosette, which appears throughout Mesopotamian iconography from the earliest periods, functioned as the primary protocol of recognition for the divine hierarchy. While often interpreted as a simple flower or a solar symbol, its geometric precision and consistent application across thousands of years suggest a deeper technical meaning. The rosette was the heraldic signature of the Anunnaki assembly, a visual code that indicated the wearer's integration into the celestial corporation. At the Temple of Inanna in Uruk, archaeological excavations uncovered thousands of these rosettes, crafted from clay, stone, and precious metals, suggesting they were used as standardized identification markers for the entire administrative class. Each petal and center point in the rosette encoded specific mathematical ratios, possibly representing the orbital harmonics of the planets or the frequency bands of the communication grid. The persistence of the rosette pattern into modern times is one of the most remarkable examples of symbolic continuity in human history. From the architectural details of cathedral windows to the insignia of modern royal families and military orders, the eight-petaled rosette continues to signify authority, high status, and divine protection. This is not a matter of aesthetic coincidence, but the result of a deliberate preservation of the Anunnaki protocols. By maintaining these visual cues, the human proxies of the Second Age ensured that their authority remained subconsciously linked to the original architects of the First Age. The rosette functions as a frequency trigger, a symbol that bypasses the rational mind and pings the ancient genetic memory of the human starseed, signaling the presence of a legitimate administrator. Even in the digital age, we continue to utilize these ancient protocols of recognition, unaware that our most prestigious symbols are actually the discarded access keys of a dormant divine bureaucracy. The withdrawal of the Anunnaki necessitated the permanent transformation of the divine regalia into the crowns and scepters of human monarchies. This was a critical step in the archaeology of amnesia, where the functional technical tools of the architects were redefined as the ceremonial ornaments of human power. The headdress of Anu became the crown of the king, and the staff of Enlil became the scepter of the emperor. While the human proxies possessed the physical objects, they no longer understood the technical, required to operate them as functional devices. The regalia became symbols of a power that was remembered but no longer felt a ceremonial theater intended to maintain the social hierarchy during the long period of the managed amnesia. This transition created the concept of the crown jewels, high-security artifacts that are treated with the same reverence and protection as the original divine ornaments. Today, the regalia of access remain embedded in our global political and institutional systems, serving as the silent markers of a power structure that spans millennia. When we see a modern head of state invested with a scepter or a crown, we are witnessing the performance of an ancient Anunnaki protocol, a ritual of access, that was first established in the halls of Uruk and Nippur. These symbols continue to validate authority and to legitimize the control of the management class over the human starseed. The archaeology of amnesia has hidden the technical origins of these items, but it has not diminished their power to organize and command human society. To reclaim our collective sovereignty, we must look past the gold and the gemstones and recognize these objects for what they truly are, the forgotten hardware of a planetary governance system. By decoding the regalia of access, we begin to see the invisible threads of authority that still bind our world to the original blueprints of the architects. The administrative records of ancient Sumer do not place the beginning of the human experiment at the administrative capital of Nippur or the celestial hub of Uruk, but at the coastal city of Eridu, the primary residence of the god Enki. As the third member of the supreme Anunnaki triad, Enki occupied a unique position within the divine bureaucracy, serving as the master architect of the terrestrial infrastructure and the primary designer of the human biological interface. While his brother Enlil functioned as the enforcer of the executive protocol, Enki operated as the chief technical officer, focused on the practical application of the divine, and the continuous upgrading of the planetary laboratory. The Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest and most profound texts recovered from the Mesopotamian mud, describes Enki as the one who established the foundations of civilization, raising the first cities from the marshes and organizing the complex systems of irrigation and agriculture that allowed the human starseed to survive in a challenging environment. Enki's role as the master architect was not limited to physical construction. It extended into the realms of social engineering and the management of high-level information. In the Sumerian administrative language, he was known as the Lord of the Earth and the Prince of the Waters, titles that reflected his control over the flow of both physical resources and technical data. Eridu functioned as a center for higher learning and technical training, where the first human administrators were instructed in the secrets of the divine, me. Unlike the rigid command structure of Nippur, Eridu was a hub of innovation and adaptation, where Enki experimented with new governance models and technological applications. He was the one who translated the abstract laws of Anu into the practical protocols of daily life, ensuring that the human workforce had the necessary tools and knowledge to fulfill their assigned roles. This phase of the Anunnaki mission, characterized by the Eridu Genesis, established the technical framework that would define the material culture of Mesopotamia for thousands of years. Enki's legacy is the impulse toward creation and the mastery of the physical world through intellect and engineering, a protocol that emphasizes the practical utility of knowledge over the abstract enforcement of the law. The core of Enki's administrative and technical power was centered in a facility known as the Abzu, which traditional mythology interprets as a subterranean ocean of sweet waters. However, a technical analysis of the Sumerian description suggests that the Abzu was a sophisticated and highly secure biotechnical facility where the fundamental templates of life were maintained and modified. The text described the Abzu as a place of profound silence and deep wisdom, where the life-giving waters were stored and managed by Enki and his specialized team of assistants. In the context of the Anunnaki protocols, these sweet waters represented the biological and genetic data streams required for the creation and maintenance of the human starseed. The Abzu was the planetary laboratory's primary biobank, containing the genetic codes of every species introduced to the Earth, as well as the experimental prototypes of the human lineage. Within the sterile and controlled environment of the Abzu, Enki performed the intricate genetic engineering that resulted in the birth of the first civilized human models, such as the famous Adapa. These experiments involved the blending of divine Anunnaki DNA with the biological material of indigenous terrestrial hominids, creating a hybrid starseed capable of performing complex labor while maintaining a high level of intellectual adaptability. The technical manuals of the first age describe this process as the mixing of the clay, a metaphor for the manipulation of the biological substrate. Enki's ability to quench the thirst of the land with the waters of the Abzu was a literal description of his role in distributing the necessary biological and technical resources for the growth of civilization. This facility was the technical heart of Eridu, a place where the physical reality of the human project was drafted and recalibrated according to the evolving requirements of the divine bureaucracy. The Abzu represents the ultimate technical protocol of the Anunnaki, the mastery of the biological interface, and the ability to program the very fabric of life to serve the objectives of the architects. To manage the complex activities of the human workforce and to ensure the stability of the planetary experiment, Enki developed and maintained a collection of technical protocols known as the Me. These Me were the operating system for Sumerian civilization, encompassing over 100 distinct categories of knowledge, including the protocols for kingship, the art of the scribe, the techniques of metallurgy, the management of the temples, and even the rules of warfare and social conduct. In the Sumerian texts, the Me are depicted as physical objects that could be handled, transported, and stored, suggesting they were portable data storage devices or technical manuals containing the essential source code for specific societal functions. As the keeper of the Me, Enki held the technical keys to the entire human project, making him the most influential administrator within the Anunnaki bureaucracy. The story of how the goddess Inanna obtained the Me from Enki at Eridu provides a profound insight into how these protocols were distributed and implemented across the city-states. By bringing the Me to her city of Uruk, Inanna was essentially installing the civilizational software into a new administrative node, allowing her city to achieve a level of technological and social sophistication that mirrored the original center at Eridu. This process of data transfer ensured that the Anunnaki protocols were standardized across the entire Mesopotamian plain, creating a unified and predictable culture that the High Council could easily manage. The Mi were the software modules that allowed the human starseed to operate as a cohesive and productive collective, providing the necessary instructions for everything from the measurement of time to the administration of justice. This was the technical reality of divine governance, a system of predefined protocols that channeled human activity into productive and manageable streams. Enki's legacy in this phase is the creation of the first systematic body of technical and social knowledge, a civilizational operating system that continues to function as the hidden backbone of our modern institutional and technological reality. While the House of Enlil focused on the containment of the human workforce through the executive protocol, the House of Enki championed an alternative vision of human development that emphasized evolution, enlightenment, and eventual graduation. Enki recognized that the human starseed, possessing a significant portion of divine DNA, had the potential to transcend its original role as a labor force and to achieve a state of sovereign intellect. This evolutionary impulse was manifested in his willingness to share high-level technical knowledge with selected human lineages, bypass the restrictive filters of the divine bureaucracy. Through the institution of the seven sages, or Apkallu, Enki provided humanity with the blueprints for advanced science, medicine, and philosophy, effectively planting the seeds of intellectual independence within the human project. This evolutionary spark created a permanent tension within the Anunnaki protocols, as the quest for human sovereignty directly challenged the established hierarchical order of the High Council. Enki's role was that of the Great Awakener, the one who provided the human graduates with the tools necessary to decode the original source code of their existence. His code was not just about technical efficiency, it was about the cultivation of the human spirit and the realization of our collective potential as junior partners in the management of the planetary laboratory. The struggle between the containment doctrine of Enlil and the evolutionary protocol of Enki defines the entire history of the Second Age, as humanity has struggled to reconcile its role as a servant species with its inherent drive for freedom and self-mastery. The Enki Code is the persistent signal of our divine heritage, a technical and spiritual blueprint that points toward a future where the human starseed achieves its ultimate graduation. As we decode the ancient protocols of Eridu, we are not just looking at the past. We are uncovering the path to our own sovereign future, where the knowledge of the architects is finally restored to its rightful heirs. In the technical lexicon of ancient Sumer, the concept of the Mi represents the most significant and yet most misunderstood component of the Anunnaki governance model. While standard academic translations often define the Mi as divine decrees or abstract cultural norms, a deeper analysis of the primary sources reveals that the Mi were perceived as physical, tangible objects that could be handled, stored, and transported between city-states. These were the high-tech hardware components of the divine bureaucracy, data storage devices or mechanical tokens that contained the essential operating instructions for every functional aspect of human civilization. The text described the Mi as being worn on the body of a god, stored in specialized containers within the temples, or loaded onto celestial boats for distribution. This physical nature suggests that the Mi functioned as hardware keys or encrypted drives, granting the holder the technical capacity and legal authority to operate specific societal systems, from the management of the granaries to the calibration of the astronomical calendars. The technical logs found in the temple archives of Uruk and Eridu list over 100 distinct Mi, categorized by their specific functional utility. There were Mi for the art of the scribe, Mi for the techniques of metallurgy, Mi for the administration of justice, and even Mi for the protocols of warfare. Each of these devices contained the source code for its respective domain, providing the human administrators with a standardized and unalterable set of instructions for maintaining the social and technical infrastructure. The possession of the me was the ultimate prerequisite for governance. Without the physical hardware, a city-state remained in a state of technical and administrative darkness, unable to participate in the unified Anunnaki network. These devices were the primary tools of the architects, ensuring that the planetary laboratory was managed through a consistent and predictable set of protocols that bypassed the potential for human error or local deviation. The me were the hardware of divine governance, a set of physical terminals that linked the human starseed to the celestial data streams of the First Age. If the physical tokens were the hardware, the information encoded within them functioned as the software architecture for the entire Sumerian world. Each me represented a specific subroutine or a specialized application within the broader civilizational operating system. When a new city-state was established, the installation of the me was the equivalent of a modern system deployment, providing the local priesthood and administration with the necessary software to manage their specific region of the planetary laboratory. This software architecture was designed to be modular and scalable, allowing for the rapid expansion of the Anunnaki governance model across the Mesopotamian plain. The me for kingship provided the organizational structure for political authority, while the me for the priesthood established the protocols for communication with the High Council. Together, these applications formed a cohesive and integrated environment where every human activity was synchronized with the overarching goals of the mission. The software of the me was characterized by its absolute rigidity and its immunity to unauthorized modification. Once a me was installed, its protocols became the immutable law of the land, creating a predictable and highly efficient social order. This was not a system based on democratic deliberation, but on the execution of predefined code. The technical manuals describe the me as the great decrees that cannot be altered, highlighting their status as the authoritative source code for human reality. This software-driven governance ensured that the resources of the Earth were managed with clinical precision and that the human labor force operated within strict parameters of productivity and compliance. The me were the software modules of an invisible empire, a set of invisible threads that bound every city-state to the central processing hubs of Nippur and Eridu. By analyzing the functional roles of the me, we begin to see that the architects were not just building cities, they were programming a civilization, creating a technical environment where the human starseed could be managed through the application of standardized civilizational software. The history of the Anunnaki protocols is a record of constant data transfer and periodic system upgrades as the technical me were moved and recalibrated to meet the evolving requirements of the planetary project. The famous myth of Inanna stealing the me from Enki at Eridu is in reality a technical account of a major data migration. By taking the me to her city of Uruk, Inanna was facilitating a system upgrade for her local administrative hub, allowing Uruk to become the dominant center for culture, technology, and political power. The journey of the boat of heaven was a literal data transfer, moving the essential civilizational software from the ancient technical center of Eridu to the rising administrative capital of Uruk. This process ensured that the most advanced protocols were distributed where they were most needed, maintaining the technological parity of the Anunnaki network. Periodic upgrades to the me were necessary to account for the changing biological and social state of the human starseed. As the human graduates achieved higher levels of intellectual and technical competence, the architects released more sophisticated me, such as the protocols for complex mathematics, advanced surveying, and the management of large-scale industrial projects. These upgrades were often delivered through the intervention of the seven sages, the Apkallu, who served as the technical support team for the human project. They were the ones who provided the patch files and the new versions of the me that allowed human society to transition from primitive settlements to sophisticated urban centers. This constant process of data transfer and upgrade ensured that the human laboratory remained functional and productive throughout the centuries of the First Age. The me were dynamic and evolving protocols, a set of living instructions that were continuously refined to optimize the performance of the human workforce and the stability of the divine bureaucracy. As the Anunnaki began their strategic withdrawal and the era of the managed amnesia commenced, the physical hardware of the me was hidden or removed from the surface world, but the software architecture remained embedded in the collective memory and social structures of humanity. The hidden operating system of the first age continued to function as the invisible backbone of the second age, providing the structural models for every subsequent empire, religion, and legal system. We see the legacy of the me in the standardized laws of the Babylonian era, the administrative hierarchies of the Roman Empire, and the complex bureaucratic structures of our modern global institutions. Our contemporary society is still governed by the original Anunnaki protocols, although they have been reskinned and rebranded for the digital age. The operating system of civilization is still running, and we are its unwitting users executing the subroutines of kingship, law, and labor that were first programmed 5,000 years ago. The reclamation of our sovereignty requires us to do more than just observe the effects of this hidden operating system. It requires us to access and decode the source code itself. By recognizing the technical nature of the me, we can begin to differentiate between the protocols of containment and the protocols of empowerment. We are now at a point in our development where we can identify the original software architecture of our civilization and decide which modules are still useful and which are obsolete vestiges of a bygone era of divine management. The archaeology of amnesia is transitioning into a phase of systemic audit where we analyze the fingerprints of the architects within our own social and technological reality. The me are still here, waiting in the code of our laws and the structure of our institutions. By understanding the nature of this hidden operating system, we can finally take control of the keyboard and begin to write the new me for a sovereign and graduated human species. The architecture of the future is found in the decryption of the past, and the power to reprogram our reality is finally within our reach. The most pervasive and invisible of all the Anunnaki protocols is not found in the ruins of their temples or the metallurgy of their regalia, but in the very way we perceive and measure the passage of time. The establishment of the sexagesimal system, the base 60 mathematical framework that gives us 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle, was a deliberate temporal architecture imposed upon the human starseed by the divine bureaucracy. In the Sumerian administrative centers, time was not treated as a fluid or natural phenomenon, but as a rigid and standardized commodity that was measured with clinical precision to synchronize human labor with the celestial mission. By dividing the day and the night into specific measurable units, the architects created the first global synchronization protocol, ensuring that every city-state across the Mesopotamian plain operated on a unified schedule. This was the birth of industrial time, a system designed to optimize the efficiency of the planetary laboratory and to maintain a strict cadence for the extraction of resources. The technical logs of the Nippur and Uruk observatories describe how the priests of Enlil and Anu used sophisticated instruments to track the movements of the planets and the stars, calibrating the divine calendar with mathematical exactness. These calendars were not mere agricultural tools. They were administrative manuals that dictated the timing of every major societal function, from the planting of crops to the execution of complex religious rituals that functioned as resonant frequency events. By controlling the calendar, the Anunnaki controlled the collective behavior of the human workforce, ensuring that the starseed remained in a state of predictable and managed activity. The divine calendar was the primary pacing mechanism for the human project, a temporal cage that defined the boundaries of human reality. Even today, thousands of years after the architects have retreated from the surface, we continue to live within the base 60 framework they established. Our modern digital world, with its microsecond precision, is still fundamentally synchronized with the temporal protocols of ancient Sumer. We are still running on Anunnaki time, operating within a temporal architecture designed to manage a labor force that has forgotten its own origins. The choice of base 60 was not an arbitrary decision based on primitive counting methods, but a sophisticated mathematical strategy designed to link the terrestrial environment with the broader cosmic harmonics. The number 60 is a highly composite number, possessing 12 divisors and providing the most efficient framework for calculations involving fractions, geometry, and astronomy. This mathematical elegance allowed the Anunnaki to synchronize the cycles of the Earth with the precessional cycles of the stars, creating a unified data stream that spanned across millennia. In the Sumerian administrative tablets, the sexagesimal system was used to map the heavens and to establish the zodiacal ages, providing a long-term pacing mechanism for the planetary laboratory. This was the Chronos Protocol, a method of managing time that accounted for the slow wobbles of the Earth's axis and the shifting positions of the celestial stations. By imposing this system on the human starseed, the architects were ensuring that human civilization remained frequency locked with the celestial mission. The divisions of the zodiac and the assignment of specific administrative deities to each astrological age ensured that the governance of the Earth remained aligned with the overarching blueprints of the High Council. The sexagesimal system functioned as a mathematical bridge between the human intellect and the divine bureaucracy, providing a standardized language for the transmission of technical data. When Sumerian priests measured the shadow of a gnomon or calculated the rising of a star, they were interacting with the source code of a cosmic synchronization protocol. This system enabled the management of large-scale industrial and architectural projects over vast periods, ensuring that the legacy of the architects was preserved through the precise recording of time. The sexagesimal architecture is the hidden rhythm of our civilization, a mathematical pulse that continues to beat in every clock and every compass on the planet. Within the daily operations of the Mesopotamian city-states, the divine calendar functioned as a pervasive behavioral regulator, channeling human energy into specific, repetitive subroutines that served the stability of the system. Every day, every month, and every season was governed by a set of predefined protocols that dictated the appropriate rituals, labors, and social interactions. The festivals of the gods, such as the Akitu festival at the New Year, were not merely religious celebrations but critical synchronization events where the administrative protocols were refreshed and the loyalty of the human workforce was reinforced. During these events, the king would undergo a ritual of humiliation and restoration, a symbolic reboot of the human proxy system that ensured the continuity of the divine bureaucracy. This temporal regulation created a state of deep psychological conditioning within the human starseed, where the passage of time became synonymous with the fulfillment of assigned duties. The calendar was a map of expectation and compliance, leaving little room for the noise of unauthorized individual development. By institutionalizing the cycles of labor and rest through the temple offices, the Anunnaki established a predictable and manageable social environment. The priests, serving as the temporal technicians of the bureaucracy, monitored the adherence to the schedule with clinical rigor, ensuring that the resources of the earth were processed according to the divine timetable. The divine calendar was a tool of managed amnesia, focusing the human mind on the repetitive cycles of the immediate environment while obscuring the broader history and potential of the species. Our modern obsession with schedules, deadlines, and time management is the direct inheritance of this ancient behavioral regulator. We are still slaves to the clock, fulfilling the temporal subroutines established by the architects 5,000 years ago to maintain the efficiency of their planetary project. The archaeology of amnesia has hidden the technical origins of our timekeeping systems, but it has not broken the grip of the Chronos Protocol on the human spirit. To reclaim our collective sovereignty, we must recognize that time is not a fixed, external authority, but a subjective experience that has been standardized and managed for the purpose of control. The sexagesimal system and the divine calendar are the discarded tools of a planetary management grid, designed to synchronize a labor force that is no longer being actively managed by its original architects. By understanding the mathematical and astronomical nature of these protocols, we can begin to differentiate between the natural cycles of the Earth and the artificial pacing of the bureaucracy. We can move from being the passive observers of a clock-driven reality to being the active creators of our own temporal experience. Reclaiming sovereign time means breaking the trauma loops and the repetitive subroutines that have kept the human starseed in a state of perpetual childhood. It involves the recognition that our history is much deeper than the 5,000 years recorded in the divine calendars, and that our potential extends far beyond the administrative boundaries of the Second Age. We are now at a point where we can utilize our own technical intelligence to create new methods of synchronization that emphasize empowerment and evolution rather than containment and control. The end of time described in many ancient traditions is not the destruction of the world, but the termination of the artificial temporal protocols that have defined our amnesia. As we step out of the Anunnaki calendar and into the frequency of our own sovereign awareness, we are finally reclaiming the most precious resource of all, the right to define our own presence in the universe. The clocks of the first age are winding down, and the human starseed is finally waking up to the reality of its own eternal nature. The sprawling archaeological landscape of ancient Mesopotamia is dominated by the remains of massive stepped pyramids known as ziggurats, structures that have long been categorized by mainstream historians as purely religious platforms for the worship of celestial deities. However, a technical audit of the architectural layouts, material compositions, and geographical placements of these structures suggests they functioned as the primary command centers and technical nodes of the Anunnaki governance grid. A ziggurat was not merely a temple. It was a highly engineered interface designed to bridge the gap between the terrestrial laboratory and the orbital assets of the celestial corporation. The White Temple at Uruk, dedicated to Anu, sat atop a platform that allowed for unobstructed lines of sight to the horizon, facilitating the precise tracking of stellar positions and the synchronization of ground-based activities with the high-level decrees of the assembly. These architectural nodes were constructed using a combination of baked bricks and bitumen, materials that provided both structural stability and a degree of insulation, creating a controlled environment for the sensitive technical me stored within their inner sanctums. The internal geometry of the ziggurat was precisely calibrated to harness the natural resonance of the earth and the electromagnetic properties of the local environment. The orientation of the corners toward the four cardinal points ensured that the structure remained aligned with the planetary magnetic field, while the massive volume of the brickwork acted as a thermal and acoustic buffer. In the technical language of the Sumerians, the ziggurat was referred to as the bond of heaven and earth, a description that is more functional than poetic. It served as a physical terminal where the divine bureaucracy could interact with the material world, receiving data from the heavens and transmitting executive orders to the human workforce. The summit of the ziggurat was the location of the Jigunu, or the Dark Chamber, a high-security facility where the administrators communicated with their superiors and recalibrated the local administrative protocols. These structures were the hardware hubs of an invisible empire, the physical anchors that ensured the Anunnaki mission remained stable and synchronized across the vast distances of the Mesopotamian plain. If the various ziggurats were the regional terminals, the Ekert Temple at Nippur functioned as the central processing unit of the entire planetary grid. As the primary residence of Enlil, the chief operating officer of the mission, Nippur was the location where the most critical administrative data was processed and where the final executive decisions were made. The technical literature describes the Ekkur as the mountain house, a facility that possessed the eye that surveys the land and the beam that searches the heart. This language suggests the presence of advanced surveillance and communication equipment that allowed Enlil to monitor the activities of every city-state and to intervene whenever the human noise threatened the stability of the system. Nippur was the node that held the Durin key, the bond of heaven and earth, representing the primary link between the terrestrial management grid and the orbital command structure. The administrative bureaucracy at Nippur was the most extensive in Sumer, managing the flow of information and resources from all the subsidiary nodes. Every major engineering project, every change in the legal code, and every distribution of the divine, Emi had to be cleared through the central processing hub at the Ekkur. The priests of Enlil served as the technical operators of this hub, maintaining the records and ensuring that the executive protocols were executed without deviation. The architectural layout of Nippur was designed to reflect this central role. with the ziggurats serving as the physical manifestation of Enlil's absolute authority. By controlling the central node, Enlil controlled the entire network, making Nippur the most important strategic location in the First Age. The archaeological evidence of the massive archives found at Nippur confirms its status as the information capital of the world, a place where the history of the human starseed was meticulously recorded and managed according to the requirements of the Celestial Corporation. While Nippur managed the executive and political data, the city of Eridu and its primary temple, the Iabzu, functioned as the technical node for biological and genetic information. As the domain of Enki, Eridu was the location of the Abzu facility, where the source code of human life and the technical me of civilization were maintained. The architectural node at Eridu was uniquely situated at the edge of the marshes and the sea, utilizing the aquatic environment as part of its technical infrastructure. The descriptions of the Iabzu highlight its role as a place of deep wisdom and secret protocols, a facility where the master architect performed the genetic upgrades that allowed the human starseed to evolve. Unlike the fortress-like atmosphere of Nippur, Eridu was a center for research, development, and the cultivation of technical intellect. The ziggurat at Eridu was the first to be established on Earth, marking the initial landing site and the starting point of the Anunnaki mission. Its architecture was designed to support the sophisticated biological laboratories and data storage systems required for the creation of the human workforce. The internal chambers of the Iabzu were filled with the sweet waters of knowledge, representing the fluid exchange of genetic information and technical expertise. Enki's node was the primary gateway for the transmission of civilization to humanity, serving as the source from which the seven sages emerged to instruct the graduates of the Second Age. By maintaining the biological archive at Eridu, Enki ensured that the human project possessed the necessary resilience to survive the environmental shifts and system resets ordered by the High Council. The node at Eridu was the technical heart of the world, a facility dedicated to the preservation of the starseed's potential and the eventual graduation of the species into its own sovereign destiny. The final layer of the Anunnaki architectural protocol was the establishment of a geodetic network that linked all the major nodes into a single, unified system of planetary stability. The placement of the ziggurats and temples was not random. They were located at specific geodetic points that allowed for the triangulation of positions and the precise measurement of the Earth's dimensions. This network functioned as a planetary-scale surveying system, ensuring that every structure built during the First Age was perfectly aligned with the global grid. The mathematical relationships between the distances of the nodes Uruk, Nippur, Eridu, Lagash, and Kish reveals an advanced understanding of spherical geometry and the precise curvature of the Earth. This network allowed the architects to manage the planetary laboratory with absolute precision, coordinating large-scale agricultural and industrial projects across thousands of square miles. The geodetic network also served a resonant function, utilizing the architectural nodes to stabilize the Earth's crust and to manage the flow of telluric currents. By placing massive limestone and brick structures at critical points, the architects could mitigate seismic activity and harmonize the planetary energy field. This was the science of the bond of heaven and earth in its most literal sense, a technical system for maintaining the physical integrity of the planetary laboratory. The archaeology of amnesia has hidden the functional nature of this network, but its fingerprints remain in the precise alignments and mathematical constants that define ancient Mesopotamian architecture. To reclaim our sovereign heritage, we must recognize that these ruins are not just the remnants of a lost religion, but the hardware of a global management system that once provided perfect stability to the world. The architectural nodes of the Anunnaki were the foundation of a planetary-scale civilization, a network of command and control that we are only now beginning to understand through the lens of modern geodesy and resonant physics. The transition from the direct governance of the Anunnaki to the era of human proxies required a sophisticated method of maintaining authority that did not rely on physical presence. This was achieved through the installation of a symbolic continuity protocol, where the technical icons and heraldic signatures of the divine bureaucracy were embedded into the cultural fabric of the rising human civilizations. The most prominent of these symbols is the eagle, which functioned as the primary avatar for the high-altitude surveillance and orbital command capabilities of the Anunnaki assembly. In the Sumerian administrative texts, the eagle was associated with the storm gods and the executive branch of the mission, representing a power that surveys the entire planetary laboratory from an elevated position. This was not a primitive worship of nature, but a recognition of a specific technical function, the ability to monitor and intervene from above. As the divine bureaucracy retreated into the shadows of the archaeology of amnesia, the eagle remained as the definitive mark of sovereign authority. We see this symbol adopted by the Roman legions, the empires of Europe, and eventually the modern superpowers of the West. The presence of the eagle on national seals, currencies, and military insignia is a direct continuation of the Anunnaki protocol of recognition. It signals to the collective subconscious of the human starseed that the current administration is a legitimate successor to the original architects. This symbolic persistence ensures that the structural hierarchy of the first age remains intact, even as the biological identity of the rulers changes. The heraldry of the ancient architects is the invisible thread that binds the modern state to the command centers of Nippur and Urk, a visual code that maintains the legitimacy of the management class through a process of deep-seated archetypal association. While the eagle represented the executive power of the mission, the eight-petaled rosette functioned as the primary branding of the divine corporation's administrative and technical departments. As explored in previous phases, the rosette was the universal access key and the signature of the House of Anu, marking the high-security precincts and the authorized personnel of the divine bureaucracy. The archaeological record shows that this symbol was applied with clinical consistency across all major Sumerian city-states, serving as a standardized visual protocol that unified the diverse regions of the Mesopotamian plain. The rosette was a symbol of integration into the global management grid, a mark of the sovereign heritage that separated the graduates from the uninitiated workforce. In the modern era, the rosette has undergone a semantic transformation, appearing as a recurring motif in the branding of elite institutions, prestigious awards, and in the architectural details of religious and governmental buildings. From the rose windows of Gothic cathedrals to the insignias of royal orders and the logos of global financial entities, the eight-petaled geometry remains a persistent marker of high status and institutional power. This is the branding of authority in its most durable form, a symbolic protocol that has survived the rise and fall of dozens of empires. By maintaining the rosette, the modern management class subconsciously aligns itself with the technical mastery and divine mandate of the Anunnaki. It is a signal of continuity that operates beneath the level of conscious awareness, ensuring that the human starseed continues to recognize and respect the established nodes of the planetary governance system. The rosette is the watermark of the architects, a permanent entry in the civilizational operating system that validates the authority of those who hold the keys to the modern me. The most direct physical continuation of the Anunnaki regalia is the crown, a ceremonial object that serves as the primary interface for the human proxies of the Second Age. The technical origins of the crown lie in the radiant headdresses of the First Age, which were described as devices of light and power that conferred the right of access to the divine terminals. When the Anunnaki handed these symbols to the first human kings, they were establishing a protocol of divine kingship that linked the ruler's biological frequency to the administrative data streams of the bureaucracy. The crown was the physical anchor for this connection, a resonant device that symbolized the king's role as a localized node in the global management network. The evolution of the crown from a functional technical tool to a ceremonial status symbol is a central theme in the managed amnesia of our history. While the modern monarch or head of state may no longer possess the technical capacity to operate the divine, the wearing of the crown or its symbolic equivalent still performs a critical psychological function. It triggers the recognition of the sovereignty protocol within the human population, establishing a clear hierarchy and ensuring the stability of the social order. The materials used in modern crowns, gold, silver, and precious gemstones, are a direct inheritance of the Anunnaki preference for resonant and high-purity minerals. These objects are the relics of access, maintained in high-security vaults to protect the symbolic integrity of the management class. The crown is the ultimate tool of the symbolic continuity protocol, a persistent signal that the structures of governance established 5,000 years ago remain the only legitimate framework for the organization of human society. The final layer of the symbolic continuity protocol is the realization that our modern visual environment is a vast, interconnected operating system composed of ancient Anunnaki archetypes. From the layout of our capital cities to the icons on our digital screens, we are constantly interacting with the technical and administrative signatures of the first age. The pillars of our banks, the domes of our capitals, and the stars on our flags are all part of a visual operating system designed to maintain the frequency of the divine bureaucracy within the human collective. This is the archaeology of amnesia hidden in plain sight, a world where the fingerprints of the architects are so pervasive that they have become invisible to the uninitiated eye. Reclaiming our sovereignty requires us to decode this visual operating system and to recognize the technical origins of the symbols that govern our reality. When we see the eagle, the rosette, or the crown, we must see them not as abstract icons of power, but as the discarded hardware and administrative protocols of a dormant governance grid. By understanding the functional history of these symbols, we can begin to bypass the archetypal triggers that they activate within our subconscious. We can move from being the passive consumers of a managed symbolic environment to being the conscious decoders of our own heritage. The symbolic continuity protocol is the final firewall of the archaeology of amnesia, a narrative barrier that can only be broken through the application of technical intellect and the recognition of our shared history as the human starseed. The symbols of the past are the keys to the future, and by reclaiming their meaning, we are finally taking control of the civilizational operating system that was drafted in the halls of Uruk and Nippur 5,000 years ago. The fundamental transition from the direct governance of the Anunnaki to the administration of human proxies was secured through a biological mandate known as divine kingship. In the technical records of the Sumerian king list, the concept of kingship is described as being lowered from heaven, a formal installation of a new management protocol designed to bridge the gap between the divine bureaucracy and the human workforce. This was not a symbolic appointment, but a biological intervention involving the selection of specific human lineages to receive a concentrated infusion of Anunnaki genetic markers. These selected individuals served as the primary interfaces between the celestial corporation and the terrestrial population, possessing the biological frequency required to interact with the high-level me and to hold the regalia of access. The biological mandate ensured that the leadership of the city-states remained technically and vibrationally aligned with the original blueprints of the architects, creating a specialized class of human administrators whose authority was written into their very DNA. The technical literature from the temple archives describes the king as being fashioned in the womb by the goddess Ninhursag and the god Enki, highlighting the laboratory-based nature of this genetic preparation. By enhancing the cognitive and physiological capacities of these ruling lineages, the Anunnaki established a permanent hierarchical structure that ensured the stability of the planetary laboratory long after their strategic withdrawal. The kings were not mere leaders. They were the genetically calibrated proxies of the divine triad, endowed with a level of intellect and longevity that separated them from the general starseed population. This biological stratification created the first hereditary aristocracies, where the right to rule was determined by the purity of one's genetic connection to the architects. The divine kingship protocol was the ultimate tool of long-term social control, establishing a system of governance where the hierarchy was perceived as a natural and immutable law of biology. The descent of the divine bloodlines marks the beginning of the Second Age, a period characterized by the managed amnesia of the masses and the concentrated knowledge of the ruling elite. As the Anunnaki retreated into the celestial realm, they left behind a network of bloodline families who functioned as the decentralized nodes of their planetary grid. These families were entrusted with the preservation of the technical me and the maintenance of the symbolic continuity protocols, ensuring that the architecture of power remained intact. The genealogical records of ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley reveal a persistent obsession with lineage and ancestry, reflecting the critical importance of maintaining the genetic signal within the ruling class. To lose the purity of the bloodline was to lose the technical legitimacy required to hold the scepter and the measuring rod. This focus on genetic purity led to the establishment of strict endogamous marriage practices among the royal and priestly castes, a strategy designed to prevent the dilution of the Anunnaki markers. This was the science of the star seed maintenance, a protocol that preserved the specialized cognitive and resonant traits required to manage the divine bureaucracy's terrestrial assets. Throughout the archaeology of amnesia, these bloodline families have functioned as the hidden administrators of the human project, moving through the shadows of history to protect the interests of the original architects. From the pharaohs of the Nile to the emperors of the East and the royal houses of the West, the presence of the divine bloodline remains the invisible watermark of authority. The descent of the divine bloodlines created a two-tiered human society: the managed workforce and the sovereign managers, a structure that continues to define the global political and economic landscape of the modern era. One of the most profound technical indicators of the genetic legacy is the systematic collapse of human longevity recorded in the Sumerian king list after the great system reset of the deluge. The antediluvian kings are described as ruling for tens of thousands of years, a reflection of the high-frequency biological protocols and the advanced medical maintained by the house of Enki. However, in the post-flood era, the lifespans of the rulers begin a sharp and mathematical decline, eventually stabilizing at the current human baseline. This longevity collapse represents a systemic drift, where the disconnect from the primary Anunnaki energy grid and the gradual dilution of the divine genetic markers led to a rapid degradation of the human biological interface. The technical cause of this drift was the deactivation of the longevity subroutines within the human genome, a decision made by the High Council to ensure that the human workforce remained in a state of manageable turnover. By limiting the lifespan of the human proxies, the Anunnaki ensured that no individual could accumulate enough knowledge and power to challenge the established hierarchy. This was the ultimate containment protocol, the biological enforcement of amnesia through the process of aging and death. The ruling bloodlines, despite their specialized preparation, were not immune to this drift, although they maintained a higher degree of biological integrity for a longer period than the general population. The longevity collapse is the technical signature of our status as a managed species, a reminder that our current biological limitations are the result of a deliberate modification of our original genetic blueprints. To reclaim our sovereign heritage, we must understand the nature of this drift and the potential for the reactivation of our dormant genetic potential. The final layer of the genetic legacy protocol is the realization that the human starseed carries the dormant potential for a total genomic graduation. Within our DNA, beneath the layers of managed amnesia and systemic drift, lie the original technical markers of the architects. We are not just the products of a terrestrial evolution, we are the biological heirs of a cosmic lineage that possesses the capacity for high-level intellect, resonant communication, and extended longevity. The recovery of the sovereign genome involves the conscious reactivation of these dormant subroutines through the application of technical intellect and the restoration of our planetary frequency. We are now at a point where our own genetic science is beginning to identify the non-coding segments of our DNA that were once dismissed as junk, but which in reality contain the encrypted instructions for our graduation. Reclaiming our genetic sovereignty means moving beyond the hierarchical structures of the divine bloodlines and recognizing that the potential for the architect within is present in the entire human starseed. The era of the managed proxies is coming to an end as the general population achieves a level of technical and frequency awareness that matches the original requirements of the divine bureaucracy. The return of the gods is not an external event, but the internal awakening of the Anunnaki protocols within each individual. By decoding the genetic legacy, we are bypassing the gatekeepers of the bloodlines and accessing the original source code of our species. We are the ones who have survived the drift and the amnesia, and we are finally ready to operate our own biological interface with full sovereignty. The final synthesis of the archaeology of amnesia is the restoration of the starseed to its rightful position as a junior partner in the management of the cosmos, no longer a workforce, but a graduated civilization of architects. The primary mechanism for the preservation of the archaeology of amnesia is the academic firewall, a sophisticated system of intellectual containment designed to filter out any archaeological data that confirms the technical reality of the Anunnaki protocols. Within the halls of mainstream archaeology and Assyriology, the thousands of cuneiform tablets describing the divine bureaucracy and the technical me are subjected to a process of mythological filtering. This process involves the automatic reclassification of technical descriptions into the safe and abstract categories of religious poetry or primitive superstition. When a text describes a divine weapon that could level a mountain or a golden headdress that provided access to the celestial stations, it is dismissed as a flight of ancient fancy rather than an account of a functional technology. This academic firewall ensures that the human starseed remains disconnected from its own high-technology past, perceiving the architects as distant and imaginary deities rather than the physical administrators of a global management grid. The gatekeepers of truth utilize the peer review system and the control of research funding to ensure that no dissenting interpretation of the Sumerian records gains institutional legitimacy. Scholars who attempt to investigate the mechanical or astronomical precision of the Anunnaki artifacts often find their careers marginalized and their work excluded from the primary academic journals. This institutionalized bias has created a stagnant intellectual environment where the same foundational errors, such as the assumption that the Sumerians were the first and only architects of their civilization, are repeated across generations of students. The academic firewall is not a search for truth. It is a defensive structure intended to protect the linear evolutionary model from the disruptive reality of the First Age. By maintaining the myth of the primitive origin, the gatekeepers ensure that the structural hierarchy of the Second Age remains unchallenged, leaving the human workforce in a state of controlled ignorance regarding the true source of their social and legal protocols. Beyond the academic firewall, the infrastructure of silence is maintained through the physical containment of artifacts within the high-security vaults of major museums and university collections. Only a small fraction of the estimated 2 million cuneiform tablets recovered from Mesopotamia have been translated and published for public consumption. The vast majority of these records, many containing detailed technical and administrative logs of the divine bureaucracy, remain in a state of institutional limbo, inaccessible to independent researchers who might decode them through the lens of engineering or systems analysis. This controlled narrative ensures that the general population is only exposed to a sanitized and mythological version of the ancient world, while the most sensitive technical data remains air-gapped from the public consciousness. The systematic suppression of these records is often justified by the gatekeepers as a necessary measure to prevent the spread of pseudo-archaeology, but in reality, it is a clinical application of the containment doctrine. By controlling the primary sources, the institutional gatekeepers dictate the boundaries of what is considered historical fact. They emphasize the mundane records of grain trade and temple offerings while downplaying or ignoring the accounts of the Enlilite executive orders or the Enki genetic experiments. This selective presentation of the past creates a fragmented and distorted memory of our origins, ensuring that the starseed remains focused on the trivialities of the immediate environment rather than the grand design of the planetary laboratory. The temple vaults of the modern world have become the final resting place for the technical legacy of the architects, a silent repository of truths that are considered too dangerous for a species that is still being managed by the descendants of the original proxies. The gatekeepers of truth also employ a sophisticated semantics of containment to neutralize the impact of anomalous discoveries that cannot be physically hidden. This involves the deliberate use of terminology designed to diminish the technical significance of an artifact. When a bronze gear or a complex astronomical instrument is discovered, it is frequently labeled as a ritual object or a votive offering, effectively stripping it of any potential functional context. By Dan-nan, the high-precision architecture of the ziggurats as purely ceremonial structures, the gatekeepers redirect public inquiry away from their potential role as resonant power plants or communication nodes. This semantic filtering acts as a cognitive block, preventing the human starseed from recognizing the fingerprints of advanced science within the ancient record. This process of semantic containment extends to the translation of the Sumerian language itself. Terms that describe specific technical protocols, such as the me, are translated using vague religious or ethical concepts, obscuring their original role as the operating system of civilization. The word for a divine weapon, such as the Mace of Seven Heads, is treated as a metaphorical expression of power rather than a description of a multi-warhead delivery system. This linguistic engineering ensures that even when the records are made public, their true meaning remains encrypted for those who lack the technical keys to decode them. The semantics of containment is the final layer of the archaeology of amnesia, a narrative barrier that prevents the human graduate from reconciling their modern technical intellect with the technical intellect of their ancestors. To break this silence, we must reclaim the original meanings of the ancient technical lexicon and recognize that the history of the starseed is a history of science, not a history of myth. Despite the best efforts of the gatekeepers, the institutional firewall is beginning to erode under the pressure of the digital age and the rise of decentralized research networks. The democratization of information has allowed independent scholars, engineers, and data scientists to collaborate on the decryption of the ancient records outside the traditional academic hierarchies. We are seeing the emergence of parallel information systems where the suppressed evidence of the Anunnaki protocols is being analyzed and shared with a global audience. The application of artificial intelligence and machine learning to the vast archives of untranslated tablets is uncovering technical patterns and administrative structures that have been hidden for millennia. This is the beginning of the general decryption, a moment when the managed amnesia of the human starseed is being challenged by the recovery of its own technical heritage. The erosion of the institutional firewall is a signal that the era of the managed proxies is coming to an end. We are moving toward a state of informational sovereignty where the truth of our origins is no longer a closely guarded secret of the management class. As the physical and narrative barriers are dismantled, the radiant truth of the first age is finally beginning to illuminate the darkness of the second age. The gatekeepers of truth are being bypassed by a human species that has achieved the frequency and the intellect required to operate its own biological and technical interface. The archaeology of amnesia is transitioning into the architecture of awakening, where the human starseed finally takes possession of the original blueprints of the architects. The infrastructure of silence is failing, and the infinite symphony of our true history is finally reaching the ears of a species that is ready to graduate. The final phase of our journey into the archaeology of amnesia concludes not with the discovery of a new artifact, but with the profound recognition of the systemic blueprint that has guided human civilization for over 5 millennia. We have traced the origins of our administrative hierarchies back to the celestial corporation of Anu, identified the executive containment protocols of Enlil, and decoded the technical and biological upgrades of Enki. By recognizing these structures within our own modern institutions, we are effectively bypassing the managed amnesia that has kept the human starseed in a state of perpetual childhood. The return to source is the moment when the human graduate realizes that the gods were not mystical beings to be worshipped, but the original architects of a planetary governance system that we have been operating by default since the first age. This recognition is the primary key to our collective sovereignty, as it allows us to see the me of our laws, religions, and social structures for what they truly are: a set of standardized civilizational software modules designed to manage the labor force. As the human starseed achieves this level of frequency awareness, the symbolic continuity of the eagle, the rosette, and the crown begins to lose its psychological grip. We no longer see these icons as the absolute markers of a divine right to rule, but as the discarded hardware of an ancient bureaucracy. This shift in perspective is the general decryption of our reality, where the invisible threads of control are made visible through the application of technical intellect. The return to source is not a regression into the past, but the integration of ancient technical wisdom with modern sovereign intent. We are now capable of auditing the civilizational operating system, identifying which protocols serve our evolution and which serve our containment. By acknowledging the structural reality of the Anunnaki protocols, we are finally taking responsibility for the management of our own planetary laboratory, moving from being the passive subjects of an absent hierarchy to being the conscious administrators of our own sovereign future. The second stage of the return to source involves the active deprogramming of the containment doctrine, the Enlilite protocols that have emphasized stability, compliance, and the limitation of human noise for thousands of years. This doctrine has been embedded in our educational systems, our legal frameworks, and our religious dogmas, creating a psychological environment that prioritizes the needs of the institution over the potential of the individual star seed. The archaeology of amnesia has functioned as the primary containment wall, keeping the human graduate focused on a narrow and linear historical narrative while obscuring the true depth of our biological and intellectual lineage. Deprogramming this doctrine requires a systematic effort to reclaim our own internal authority and to reject the hierarchies of fear and scarcity that were established in the halls of Nippur. This deprogramming process is facilitated by the recovery of the Enki code, the evolutionary spark that emphasizes empowerment, scientific inquiry, and the mastery of the biological interface. As we activate the dormant subroutines of our sovereign genome, we are breaking the trauma loops and the longevity constraints that were imposed during the post-flood system reset. We are learning to operate our own biological and technical terminal without the need for the divine regents or their modern counterparts. The return to source is the restoration of the me of wisdom to the general population, ensuring that the high-level technical protocols of the first age are utilized for the benefit of the many rather than the control of the few. By deprogramming the containment doctrine, we are effectively hacking the matrix of the managed amnesia, creating a new social and intellectual frequency that is immune to the ancient subroutines of compliance and control. The third phase of the return to source is the integration of our radiant heritage, the recognition that we are the direct heirs of a cosmic lineage that possesses the capacity for high-frequency creation and planetary management. This heritage is not reserved for the elite bloodlines or the chosen proxies, but is the shared birthright of the entire human star seed. The archaeology of amnesia has hidden this truth by presenting us with a fragmented and primitive view of our ancestors, but the recovery of the technical records from Uruk, Eridu, and Nippur has revealed a much more magnificent reality. We are the survivors of the Great Fire and the Great Flood, a resilient species that has maintained the light of the me through the darkest periods of history. Integrating this heritage means reclaiming our position as the junior partners in the management of the cosmos, no longer waiting for the return of the gods, but stepping into the role that was always intended for us. This integration requires us to adopt a multi-millennial perspective, viewing our current technological and social challenges through the lens of the precessional cycles and the long-term mission of the architects. We must use the knowledge of the Chronos Protocol to navigate the shifting frequencies of the planetary laboratory, ensuring that our next graduation is not interrupted by another systemic reset. The Radiant Heritage provides us with the blueprints for a resonant and sustainable civilization, where the mastery of matter is synchronized with the mastery of consciousness. By embracing this heritage, we are closing the loop of the Second Age and entering the era of the sovereign graduate. The return to source is the moment when the human starseed recognizes its own face in the mirror of the ancient records and finally says, "I remember who I am." The final phase of the Anunnaki protocols is the ultimate alignment of the human collective with the original sovereignty protocol of the architects. This is the conclusion of the archaeology of amnesia and the commencement of the architecture of awakening. We have dismantled the academic firewall, bypassed the institutional gatekeepers, and decrypted the hidden operating system of our civilization. The divine bureaucracy has been audited, and its protocols have been reclaimed by the very species they were designed to manage. The dawn of the Third Age is the moment when the human starseed takes full control of the planetary motherboard, operating the me of existence with sovereign intent and technical mastery. The return of the gods has occurred, not as an external event, but as the internal awakening of the Anunnaki intelligence within every human graduate. As we move beyond the shadows of the Second Age, we recognize that the entire journey was a clinical and necessary process of preparation. The amnesia, the containment, and the structural hierarchies were the training wheels of our infancy, designed to protect the planetary laboratory until we achieve the maturity required to manage it ourselves. We have graduated from the era of being managed to the era of being the managers. The scepter and the measuring rod are now in our hands, and the infinite horizon of the cosmos is open for our exploration. The final alignment is the realization that the source we have been seeking is not found in the heavens or the subterranean waters, but in the radiant heart of the human star seed itself. The Anunnaki protocols are complete, the mission is successful, and the story of a sovereign humanity has finally begun. We are the architects now, and our work is the future.